You may have seen the teaser for Quake 6.
This means that a new Quake game is in development.
Codenamed Quake 6.
Quake 6. We're going to talk about Quake 6. Specifically, my wish list for the game and what I would like to see implemented into the title. I do think if this game is handled well, it could bring Quake back into the limelight while still keeping its older player base happy. At least that is if it's real. I'm not so sure anymore, gamers. Now for this video, I'll mainly be talking about the multiplayer, although the things I talk about will bleed into the single player a little bit. I don't doubt Bethesda can cook up an excellent single player, as they did with Doom. As long as they don't depart too much from the previous Quake games, it really should be a cakewalk. Now before we get into my wish list, I want to talk about my criteria and reasoning for these wish listed ideas. I think Quake 6 needs to feel new and unique in comparison to previous titles, while at the same time maintaining its identity as a Quake game. This means that things like bunny hopping and rocket jumping are a must for this game. Without them, this is not a Quake game. The multiplayer especially should be similar to previous Quake titles in a general sense. At the same time, modern live service monetization models are something that I think is a must for this game to succeed long term. It is the direction the industry is moving, and Quake will have to follow suit. It doesn't matter if you feel they are good or bad for the industry, it's just the way it is if you want the game to perform well, especially as a multiplayer title. As much as these live service models get hate, I do think they have their benefits. I think a game getting supported long term, especially a multiplayer game, is overall a good thing. As long as there isn't pay to win BS, I really don't see a problem with it. This also means there should be some significant gameplay changes or additions to the game to help it stand out. We are not looking for a Quake 3 remaster. We are looking for a brand new Quake game. Another part of my reasoning is that the game should be easier to get into. I want more people to play Quake with, and so making the game easier to learn while still maintaining its high skill ceiling should be a big goal. This is incredibly important, especially considering the Quake series' current state. There are parts of the gameplay that are fairly archaic at times, although not as bad as some would make it out to be. Along with this, the game's design philosophy at times really only works in duel, making other more casual modes feel half-baked or unfair. I'll get into what I mean with this in a bit, but for now, let's start with the 6 things I think should be in the new Quake game. Number 1. A greater emphasis on movement. I think the most unique part of Quake by far is the movement. Bunny hopping alone is such a fun and interesting mechanic that paved the way for movement in shooters for decades. I think this newest Quake title should not only have the same movement from the previous games, but more on top of that. The previous titles, however, have several different types of movement techniques, with some being preferred over others. Quake Live, for example, is probably the most active Quake game in the Quake series, and it features strafe jumping, where holding W and a strafe key will accelerate a player forward while jumping. Strafe jumping comes at the cost of not being able to make sharp turns around corners, as you are unable to air strafe. Quake Live specifically doesn't feature air strafing, which is a bummer in my opinion. Then you have the more traditional bunny hopping found in games like Quake 1 or Quake 3's CPMA mod. This is where you alternate pressing the strafe keys and don't press W. The main difference between this and strafe jumping is your ability to turn, with bunny hopping being better for making turns and strafe jumping being better for gaining speed rapidly. There's also Quake 4 Strog Slide, but I don't think anyone misses this or Quake 4. Now, if I had to pick between both of these, 9 times out of 10, I'm picking bunny hopping. Like, this really shouldn't even be a debate. Bunny hopping on an objective level adds more skill expression to the game in both combat and movement. For one, it adds more depth to map traversal, opening up possibilities that aren't available without air strafing. Reflex Arena is a great example of this. There are lots of cool trick jumps and movement tricks that are not possible without air strafing. It also adds depth to the combat as well. For example, you can essentially air dodge rockets when air strafing, adding a layer of interaction to pop-up situations not found without air strafing. Strafe jumping is really hollow in depth compared to bunny hopping, which is why I think it would be better for Quake 6. The only argument I can see being made against bunny hopping is that it's arguably harder to do, but I would say that it isn't much harder than strafe jumping anyway. But here's the thing. You can also just have both. There are several Quake-likes, such as Reflex Arena, any defrag freight race mod, the original CPMA mod. They all have both strafe jumping and bunny hopping active at the same time, which is probably the best form of movement because it has no compromise at all and raises the skill ceiling enormously. This would be the best way by far to make Quake more about movement and help it stand apart from other FPS games which maybe have little bits and pieces of this style of movement but don't have the complete package. It's also just way funner. Like, I don't know why you would want less movement in a game. That's really silly. So it's like take what you can get. It's way better. Another part of the movement I would like to see in addition to this is auto hop. This is mainly just to reduce the learning curve, especially for those who would be playing on a controller. The addition of auto hop doesn't really hurt the skill ceiling of the game in any way, so I don't see a problem with it. As for new additions to the movement, I think they should add a form of wall jump, more specifically a wall kick, kind of like the wall kicks from Titanfall 2 or from Warforged. This would of course add more depth to the movement and map traversal, but it also adds a lot more depth to the combat of the game. I've swapped to a different mic now. Tired of trying to sync up the audio between Audacity and my phone, so this is what we're rolling with now. If you look at any Warforged Clan Arena footage, I think you'll get what I mean when I say it'll add depth to the game, because holy crap, the movement in that game, just because of that one mechanic alone, just takes it to a whole new level. It is insane. The main purpose behind putting a larger emphasis on movement is simply because it is the most enjoyable part of Quake. This is why I think one of the most popular modes in Quake is Clan Arena, as it's where the players have the most freedom to use the movement in the game. I want to bring the fun parts of modes like Clan Arena as well as Duel to the general parts of the game, which I'll cover Duel in a second. Number 2. Weapon changes. Now, the next thing I'd like to see added to Quake is a little radical. A gameplay feature long feared by Quake gamers since the dawn of time. A product of modern gaming and modern gamers' desire to have fun. Something so abhorrent and wrong it defies everything an arena FPS game is. Loadouts.
And I'm gonna show you guys the top 5 movement meta loadouts.
Loadouts in Quake 6. Your reaction.
Cherry? Another cherry?
Now, before you get your panties in a bunch and write a comment about how modern gamers, such as myself, should be admitted in mental hospitals, let me explain what I mean when I say I think Quake 6 should feature loadouts. I am not talking about this Call of Duty style loadout. Call of Duty style loadouts, although cool, do not fit the identity of Quake at all, and also ruin a big part of what makes Quake special, and that is the weapon variety. And particularly the ability to hold every weapon in the game all at the same time. What I'm referring to would look more like this. This would be something more similar to TF2 if you could have access to every weapon at once. Each of these slots is for a different weapon, with you being able to select a different version of each weapon or a modifier for each weapon to use in-game. This would be, again, similar to something like TF2's loadout system or the weapon mod system introduced in the newest Doom games. Like, imagine a modifier for the rocket launcher that turned it into a laser-guided rocket from Half-Life 2, or one that would allow you to detonate it mid-air with a right-click. Like, you could even have modifiers that just change the weapons to entirely different ones, like changing a grenade launcher to a tri-bolt from Champions. Although this thing is complete and utter garbage, and I don't know why Champions decided to get rid of the launcher and slap it on the most bland and boring character in the roster. Holy crap, Champions, your game is garbage. You could even have really simple modifiers, like ones that would make rocket self-damage 50% weaker. Another modifier would be like one for the shotgun, where you can have a more buffed up super shotgun type weapon that's really good up close, or a more balanced combat style shotgun like from Quake 1. Point is, you're giving players more content to play around with and experiment with outside of new maps, which is really all Quake games have after their release. This also means that if this game were to go to the live service route, they could add new weapons to the game just by creating new modifiers. This loadout system allows for on-the-map resource management to work well and actually complement this system by allowing for unique moments of player choice. This is because two players can pick up the same weapon and use it in completely different ways than the other, meaning there would also be unique player interactions that would be specific to weapon modifiers. Now, a lot of people will see the system and complain that it would add matchups and metas to this game, which, oh boy, there is a lot wrong with that statement. First of all, matchups and metas have existed in competitive games forever now and will almost always exist in some way, shape, or form, with Quake being no exception. And when I say this, I'm not referring just to Quake Champions, but all of Quake. Every Quake game has had a meta, but the main difference between it and other game series is that it has remained relatively consistent and balanced. Lightning Gun will always be good for pushing people back and air juggling them. Rockets will always be good for spamming hallways and more close quarters combat, and the grenade launcher will also always get shafted in some way that just makes it garbage, except for Quake 1. Oh, that's funny. Now, this balance isn't because Quake is some god-gifted game that is so perfect and its balancing transcends reality, but rather because there is very little to screw up here. Quake only has about 6 or 7 weapons which are actually important to the game's meta, which isn't a lot. If you wanted to be really cynical, you could say the only 3 weapons that matter are rocket launcher, lightning gun, and railgun, which, depending on the game mode, wouldn't be a stretch. Quake's balancing philosophy of weapons having very specific use cases also contributes to this, with it being very easy to balance the power of a weapon if you aren't comparing it to other weapons. To give you an idea of what I mean by this, I'm not going to sit here and claim that the rocket launcher is weaker than the railgun because it isn't hit scan at full range. The 2 weapons are designed to do completely different things than each other, and therefore are very easy to balance because you're not trying to maintain the power levels between the 2 at the same task, right? Versus a game like CSGO, the balancing act between the M4A1S and the AK is probably pretty tough because both weapons at the end of the day do the same thing and do it in very similar ways. So trying to keep a distinct identity between the 2 weapons while maintaining their balance is a lot harder. Even then, there have been cases where Quake's balancing was pretty bad. Quake 1, I feel, is a little unfair to call out as it was the first game, but its balancing was outright terrible. A better example would be Quake Live's terrible grenade launcher. This thing straight up didn't do its job at all and was really better than rocket spam in only the nichest of scenarios. Other parts of this game are kind of stinky too, like the balancing changes from Quake 3 to this game just suck balls, and the railgun is completely busted in this game, in my opinion. So, yeah, shout out to Quake Live for sucking balls. As for matchups, although there haven't been any direct matchups in Quake besides champions, a large part of Quake, and particularly duels, are the matchup between players in terms of their stack and arsenal. There are also weapon matchups as well, with some weapons being better at beating others in certain situations. To imply that Quake doesn't have matchups is just completely false. Now, could a meta develop? Yeah, of course, as would happen with any game. But the addition of new content would, if anything, slow this process down by adding more variables to consider when deciding a meta. And if the game is balanced well, it becomes even harder to form a dominant meta. I would also like to add that metas are about 50% human interpretation. A meta is not what the strongest strategy is in a game, but rather what the perceived strongest strategy is by its players. Metas very, very well can be wrong. Now, would matchups develop? Yeah, probably. But they wouldn't be as nearly bad as the matchups in Quake Champions, which lead to messes like this. I don't know what they were thinking here, kind of pulling like a weird League of Legends banning characters thing, but like, this is bad. This sucks. I hate this. I also don't see anything inherently wrong with matchups or metas regardless. Overall, I think the loadout system would be really cool. It adds more stuff in the game to use while maintaining the on-the-map resource management style system set up by previous titles. More weapons equals more variety, which equals more appeal, which equals more fun. Now, there is one other part of this loadout system I would like to go over next. Number 3, items. Quake 3 introduced items. These are one-time use on-the-map resources that have a variety of effects. Medkit gives the player 100 HP, the teleporter teleports a player to a random spawn, and the shield does whatever this is. Now, what if there was an additional loadout slot that let you have these items on spawn? You see what I'm cooking here, dog? Now, these items by themselves kind of suck, so you would definitely need to rework some of them, as well as add a whole lot of new ones. Like a smoke grenade would be really cool. A trip mine or a tripwire would be neat. A bulletproof barrier type thing I think would be cool. The sky is the limit. Diabolical had a very similar system for this too, having like little grenades that do things, but unlike my idea, these are also just purely on-the-map resources. As for if it would be an on-the-map resource to obtain these items, or if you would need to pick up an ammo type for them, or they would just be on a cooldown, doesn't really matter to me. But just some sort of system that adds utility to the game would be neat, and this would probably be how I would do it. It once again adds depth to the game and increases the overall appeal. And I think Diabolical already did a very good job of this. I think just something even just straight up what Diabolical did would be good too. I just want more stuff in the game, really. That's kind of the whole point of the loadout system, is just find a way to add more stuff to the game without hurting the on-the-map resource management system that has been set in place for the previous titles. Number 4, Armor and health. Quake's armor system is a big part of the game's resource management and creating engagement. Duel is where this system shines the brightest, with players denying and stealing resources from one another to gain a stack advantage and eventually force them into a disadvantaged state and frag them. One big part of Duel especially is determining your opponent's overall health and when to play aggressive and defensive in relation to that health. This system works beautifully and is a great example of skill expression in relation to game sense. That is, if you are playing Duel. However, outside of Duel or Clan Arena, this system works pretty poorly. Gauging your opponent's health and modes with larger player counts is essentially a guessing game where you hope your opponent just spawned and hasn't picked up any armor yet. This frankly sucks and lacks the requirement of good game sense that modes like Duel have. In Duel, even if you aren't in direct control of the map's resources, you can still use that information to know your opponent's level of control, but TDM unfortunately lacks that. This leads to another issue present in bigger team modes, and that is item cycling. In Duel, the player in control needs to grab the armors as they spawn. They have a 25-second respawn timer, and a map will typically have about 3 armors. This will lead to the player in control going from armor to armor as they respawn, denying their opponent of the resource. Their opponent's goal is to slow down their opponent and steal these resources, eventually gaining the stack advantage and becoming the player in control. This interesting and deep combat structure is completely thrown out the window in modes with any more than like teams of 2. And if the teams are even bigger, like teams of 8, you end up fighting your own teammates for resources. It really sucks when a below average player takes an armor only to die with it moments later, as it makes the resource completely moot. If you or a better player would have had that resource, it likely would have been put to good use. This is why more often than not you will see large gaps on scoreboards for these bigger games, as only a handful of players on the winning team got access to the resources available. This is further exacerbated by power-ups like quad damage, creating huge gaps even between players of similar skill. I had an example of this happen to me in a match I played recently. So I'm pretty damn low in HP, okay? This other guy, I shouldn't say steal, but he's gonna go take the mega health too. He's got a lot more health than me, right? At this point in time in the match, and for the entirety of the match, I was top frag. So I was definitely the MVP here, and so because of that, I would think I earned it more, right? So I saw him going to take it, and I'm like, I can't let this happen. So I just barely push him off it and steal it from him. Like, you could see the moment that his world fell apart. So I pick it up, and then he stands there and takes the hit, and then tap him with the LG, and then I turn around to see who was shooting at us. But bro was distraught in this moment. He was his world was falling apart. Okay, but the match goes on as usual, like nothing. I was doing a good job there, but during that, a vote kick starts on this dude. I wasn't paying attention, but in text chat, yeah, he's so mad. He's so angry. Even though I definitely would have put that to better use there, and even though it really doesn't matter, like it's not like he would have clutched anyway. Collard was coming in, like the kill us both. Like, it really didn't matter. It's not a big deal, but he's so angry. He's so mad. Now, I'm locked in. I'm not paying attention to that at all, so I keep playing. And you'll see here in a second, I had no idea until I watched the VOD back. Vote kick starts. He rocketed me from behind for my health. This is true. This is entirely true. But I don't even think I notice the vote kick. Yeah, right here I start. This is where I'm like, wait, what did he do? I had no idea until much later. I'm sorry I took the mega, but I needed it more than you, and I was popping off, dude. No cap, I was demolishing that game. I definitely, it was justified, I'm sorry. But in all seriousness, he really did have every right to be upset. I was denying him of enjoying the most unique aspect of Quake so I could selfishly keep dominating the match. Which I did in very convincing fashion, thank you. Player in chat said this after he got upset. Essentially, he said here, Quake is a dog-eat-dog game, which I entirely agree with and is my main problem with the game in larger team settings. These issues are pretty hard to solve, as the on-the-map resources are kind of baked into Quake's identity, but are also the main contributor to this problem. But I do have an idea. To solve the issue of cycling in larger team modes, what if? And honestly, I'm pretty shaky about this idea myself. I'm really just kind of spitballing this one, so definitely let me know what you think about this one in the comments. I'm not super sure on it. But what if when I pick up an armor within a certain distance to my teammates, they too get armor. This would encourage the cycling of items similar to how modes like Duel play out, without forcing players to do it or share. Now, I'll be honest, this isn't the most elegant solution. For one, this would make the game very snowbally against a coordinated team, which, to be fair, isn't too dissimilar from Duel, a very snowbally mode. And if you went with an armor system similar to Quake Live, as it has some of the weakest armor, and combine that with stronger weapons, then it wouldn't be as snowbally as a game where the armor absorption is higher, like in Quake 1 or Reflex Arena. But this isn't the only issue. Where do you draw the line for what is and isn't eligible for multiple people to pick up at a time? I think armor and weapons would be fine for this, but what about power-ups? Like quad damage or hazard would be an obvious no, but what about mega health? I don't think it would be fair for a whole team to get mega health, but mega is quite integral to the resource management in Quake. Most maps are balanced in a way where out of spawn, players have a similar stack to each other once they engage one another. But if only one player got mega, that would put one team at a disadvantage out of spawn, as one team would have a significantly higher armor stack than the other, and then the other team just has one dude with mega and then a bunch of kind of mediocre armor. This issue is a pretty tough one to solve. I could totally see Quake 6 not doing anything regarding this at all, although that would mean modes like Duel and Clan Arena would once again be the superior modes to modes like Team Deathmatch, which is a real shame, as variety brings more player appeal. But what about gauging player health? Now, this one's a lot more simple. You just add a visual or auditory cue for when someone's armor is broken. Diabolical did something similar to this, and I think it works quite well. Adding small indicators like this lower the skill floor and add a lot more consistency to the game. I think if you wanted, you could add a Doom style visual indicator for health too, where your character will look super beat up when they're low on HP, and they can see it in their HUD as well. The goal of changes like these would be to make the game easier to get into and help players learn faster, making the game more accessible overall. Speaking of accessibility, number 5, accessibility. There are a lot of parts of Quake that really show its age. Like, for example, the game's lack of a ping system, something that is present in almost every shooter nowadays, and for good reason. I think with a new Quake title, added features such as a ping system would be a big part of modernizing it for new audiences, once again widening the game's appeal. Another thing that would be nice to see is visual item timers, not HUD timers. That is some newbie little baby stuff. I don't care what no HUD timers. That's where I draw the line. That's stupid. But a timer that is at the location of an item showing its individual spawn time, like in Quake Champions. I don't think this should be present in Duel, but it's almost a must in TDM. Another thing I think would be cool is a Mario Kart style camera swing around the map before a match starts. It could go over where key items are, like armor, weapons, and health pickups. And then you could also have some waypoints appear as you spawn, showing where the items are from your perspective, them then disappearing and the match starting. Or which I went and researched this after writing the script. You could just do what Diabolical did, where if you press a number key, it'll show you where a weapon is according to what key you pressed. It has a mini-map, a very well-done mini-map that shows you where armors and health are, which is huge. And just honestly, just be like Diabolical. Like, I'd actually rather have that than any of the crap. I'm like, you know what? No Quake 6. Just make Diabolical 2. I'd rather have that. Oh my gosh. Along with these features, the game needs to maintain accessibility features it had before, such as customizable HUDs. Quake Champions not having features like this is probably the #1 reason I don't play it over Quake Live. This is the equivalent of CS2 not having a left-handed view model. It's just silly. And finally, number 6, a level editor and servers. The most disappointing part of Quake Champions was the lack of mod support and community server support. I do slightly understand the community server thing, as I do like having things like skill-based matchmaking, but come on. Community servers are a big part of why games like Counter-Strike and TF2 are still around, with them existing to create environments catered to the way people want to play the game, which leads me to level editors, the #1 way to keep a game alive for decades to come. Level editors, especially when they are more robust in the cases of things like Fortnite Creative, open up avenues for not just the competitive scene of a game, but everyone who plays the game and then some, spawning their own communities dedicated to those community-created parts of the game. As much as I hate Overwatch, its workshop mode is super cool. I am a massive Genji Ball enjoyer, and One Dad versus 11 Babies, although it is a mess, is a beautiful one. Now, does Quake need a level editor that's equivalent to your own personal Unreal 5 engine? No, but something powerful and capable of powering lots of different ideas and styles is a must for a new Quake title. If I can make my own rendition of Aerowonk, but it's sideways, or features the plasma gun, then I'm happy. Well, there's my ideas for Quake 6. I definitely feel stronger about some of these ideas more than others. I look at the armor redistribution idea and feel weird about it. Like, I don't know really how something like that would work without testing it myself, but who knows, maybe it saves the game. Maybe it makes TDM actually playable with randos. That about does it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. What would you guys like to see in Quake 6? Do you even think there should be a Quake 6? More content coming soon, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye! Bye-bye!
Look, a shooting star. Bronco, you're changing.